Have you ever imagined trying to conquer an entire nation with nothing but a single decision? Far from Rome, on the western edge of the known world, the land is quiet. No marching columns in sight, no standards flapping in the wind, no clash of shields or horses, just empty hills, forests, and valleys. And history itself, waiting for someone bold enough to seize it. Welcome to Gaul, in the year 52 BC, a place where a Roman general named Julius Caesar is about to turn an entire region of Europe into a stepping stone for his own ambition. Take a look. Before the Clash of Steel, Gaul is only quiet hills, deep forests, and distant villages. A land waiting for history to find it. With a few commands and the movement of messengers, the silence vanishes. From the south and east, Roman legions advance. Red cloaks, polished shields, and disciplined ranks marching in perfect formation. Every line, every column, drilled to move as one. These are Caesar's legions. Facing them, hidden in the forests and hills of Gaul, are long-haired, bearded warriors with round green shields, the Gauls, men who refuse to bow their heads to Rome. Their leader, Vercingetorix, understands one thing with brutal clarity. If he meets Rome in open battle, his warriors will be cut down and scattered. So he pulls back. He leads 80,000 men into Alesia, a natural fortress on a high hill, protected by forests and steep rocky slopes. From the plain below, Caesar looks up at it, a brutal stronghold. Tens of thousands of spears and arrows already in position behind the defenses. A frontal assault? Suicide. Caesar needs a different plan. A plan so daring, it just might work. And then he finds it. If he cannot break through the defenses going up the hill, he will make sure the defenders can never come down. Caesar decides to besiege the entire mountain. He doesn't just surround the walls of Alesia, he encircles the last hope of the Gauls themselves. Instead of throwing his men against the fortifications, he chooses to turn the hill into a prison. From that moment on, the mind of a tactical genius begins to reshape the battlefield. Around Alesia, a colossal ring of fortifications starts to grow. On the ground around Alesia, the transformation begins. Roman engineers mark out lines in the soil. Soldiers dig, hammer, and lift day after day. What look like simple stakes and beams at first become something far more deadly. In less than 3 weeks, the Romans build nearly 18 kilometers of continuous fortifications, tightening a wooden noose around the entire hill. The wall rises about 4 meters high, backed by ditches, obstacles, and watchtowers at regular intervals. Each tower is a pair of eyes, watching every movement on the slopes and behind the walls of Alesia. But that still isn't enough. In front of the wall, Caesar orders deep trenches. In front of the trenches, he has pits dug and filled with sharpened stakes. Beyond those, he creates lilies, deep, narrow holes with lethal spikes at the bottom, carefully concealed. Layer upon layer, a ring of death. Water-filled ditches, stake pits, open killing grounds. What emerges is not just a barrier, but a masterpiece of calculated cruelty. Inside Alesia, the Gauls watch all of this from above and sneer. Keep building. We'll see who runs out of food first. They are convinced that if they can hold long enough, a massive relief army will come to save them. And when that happens, Alesia will not be Caesar's triumph. It will be his grave. But war does not always follow the plans written in neat lines inside manuals. While the ring of fortifications is still incomplete, while trenches and pits are still unfinished, a unit of Gallic cavalry finds a narrow gap. They spur their horses, burst through the Roman lines, and vanish into the countryside, like a drop of water slipping over the rim of a cup. One small mistake, Caesar allows them to get out. And sometimes, that is all it takes to shift the balance of an entire war. Not long after, bad news arrives. On the horizon, dust clouds begin to rise. The distant roll of war drums spreads like thunder. Around 250,000 Gallic reinforcements, a grand coalition of tribes, are marching towards Caesar's rear. On the hill, 80,000 Gauls are still trapped inside Alesia. Outside, 250,000 more are coming to break the siege. Between them stand only about 50 to 60,000 Romans. In a single terrifying moment, the roles are reversed. The hunter has become the prey. So what does Caesar do? Run? Abandon the siege, march back to Rome under the pretext of bad weather, misfortune, or treachery? No, he gives a different order. Build another wall. If there is an enemy in front and another behind, then walls will be raised to hold back both. Outside the first ring around Alesia, Caesar orders a second line of fortifications, this time facing outward, toward the approaching relief force. Another ring, even larger, stretching up to 21 kilometers. Between those two lines of defenses stand the Roman legions, not as prisoners, but as blades wedged between two slabs of meat. The Romans now live inside a deadly donut of earth and timber. At the center of the donut, on the hill of Alesia, 80,000 desperate Gauls. On the outside, 250,000 more, crying out for blood. And caught between those two extremes is Caesar. Night falls. The bright light of day drains into cold shades of blue and purple. Shadows from the fortifications stretch long across the ground. Campfires flicker in the darkness, each one a small island of orange light in a vast sea of tension. From inside Alesia, Gallic warriors surge down the slopes, hurling themselves against the inner Roman wall. Outside, 250,000 reinforcements crash into the outer defenses. War horns scream from both directions, their echoes colliding in the narrow space between, like two waves trying to crush everything caught in the middle. Rome is under attack from both fronts. On the ramparts, Roman soldiers grit their teeth as they heave enemy ladders back into the void. At the base of the walls, Gauls stumble into trenches, plunge into stake-filled pits, and are torn apart by the lilies hidden beneath the soil. In the midst of all this chaos, another force shapes the battle. Roman discipline, drilled reflexes, and officers racing to plug every gap. The night at Alesia is long and soaked in sweat, blood, and fear. But when the last trace of moonlight gives way to dawn, one fact still stands. Caesar has not fallen. Dawn at Alesia brings no comfort. The sun rises, but its light feels less like warmth and more like a golden blade, tracing every flaw along the Roman defenses. There is one area the walls cannot fully protect, where the cliffs of Mount Rhea are too steep and jagged for solid fortifications. That is the weak point, the one the Gauls have been waiting for. On the decisive day, they send 60,000 of their best warriors straight at that vulnerable stretch. The Roman shield wall at the foot of Mount Rhea buckles under the impact. Spears, axes, and swords pour down on them like a storm. At the most dangerous point on the entire defensive ring, Roman numbers are at their thinnest. Every meter of ground is contested with screams and steel. Every soldier is pushed one step closer to disaster. One more step and the entire line will break. At that exact moment, Caesar does something very few commanders of his time would dare. He goes to the front himself. He does not hide behind a command tent. He does not remain safe dictating orders from the rear. He runs along the walls, from one threatened sector to the next, calling out the names of his centurions, steadying his men, pointing toward the enemy, and giving his soldiers a reason to hold on for just one more heartbeat. Then, at the foot of Mount Rhea, in front of men on the brink of collapse, he does something simple but unforgettable. He strips off his red cloak. The bright crimson fabric snaps in the wind atop the ramparts, burning under the harsh sun like a living flame. Caesar knows that if his men can see him in the middle of that chaos, they will fight not just for pay, not just out of discipline, but for the man standing there beside them. There! That's Caesar! The cry rises from the ranks, from one group to another, until it ripples along the entire line. And sometimes, that alone is enough to pull an army back from the edge of total collapse. But even with Caesar himself on the wall, even with trenches, walls, and traps, when the difference in numbers is this enormous, courage still needs one final ingredient, a last move. From behind the main line, Caesar releases his trump card, the German cavalry, mercenary horsemen trained to smash enemy formations with sudden, devastating attacks from the rear. They move quietly around the battlefield, disappearing from the sight of Gauls who are too focused on hammering the Roman position at Mount Rhea. And then, like thunder exploding behind them, they strike. The Gauls, who moments earlier believed they only had to crush a thin strip of Roman wall, suddenly realize behind them are the iron hooves of Rome. Crushed between two jaws, the fortifications in front and cavalry in the rear, the elite Gallic force begins to fracture. One man turns and runs, then two, then 10, then entire ranks. In war, the moment when morale breaks can be faster than a single breath. And at Alesia, the resolve of the Gauls finally shatters. Once the elite corps collapses, the great Gallic relief army starts to disintegrate like a receding tide. Units that had charged forward with confidence now fall back in confusion. Formations crumble into scattered groups looking for any path away from the slaughter. In reality, these are tens of thousands of warriors watching their last hope evaporate. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watches from the walls. He knows it is over. The grand relief force, the final chance to shatter the siege, has dissolved like soap bubbles under Caesar's pressure. Alesia is no longer a fortress waiting to be saved. It has become a perfect trap. Silence slowly returns to the battlefield. The shouting fades. The clash of steel grows rare and distant. What remains is the sound of wind whistling through shields left in the ground, and heavy footsteps echoing along the ramparts. The gates of Alesia begin to open, not for the Gauls to charge out in one last desperate attack, but for a single man to walk down, Vercingetorix. He wears his armor, mounts his horse, and rides down the slope toward the Roman camp. Every hoofbeat lands like a blow on the pride of his people. In front of Caesar, Vercingetorix dismounts. Many later accounts say he removed his armor, laid down his weapons, and set them at Caesar's feet in a ritual of surrender. Whether every detail is exact or not, the conclusion is the same. Vercingetorix surrenders. One of the greatest sieges in military history comes to an end. Caesar has completely conquered Gaul, and from that foundation, he will move closer and closer to absolute power, and to the knives waiting for him on the steps of the Senate. If we treat Alesia as a case study in strategy, there are 3 major lessons we can take away. First, turn your weakness into a trap. Caesar is deep in enemy territory, far from his base and short on supplies. On paper, it's a terrible situation, but by forcing the decisive moment at Alesia and building 2 rings of fortifications, he transforms the "we are surrounded" problem into a pressure cooker that traps the enemy inside with him. Second, controlling space matters more than having numbers. The Gauls have more men, but they do not get to decide where and how the battle unfolds. The Roman fortifications force them to attack through narrow gaps, into ditches, traps, and walls, places where their numerical advantage is shaved away bit by bit. Third, always prepare for the worst case scenario. Caesar builds the outer ring of defenses before he sees a single soldier from the relief force. He doesn't wait for disaster to appear and then scramble to respond. He shapes the battlefield in advance, so when the worst happens, his troops are already in the right positions. That way of thinking, designing for the worst case instead of hoping it won't happen, is useful not just in war, but in business, investing, and even in how you plan your own time. That is how Julius Caesar used stone, wood, and earth to crush a coalition of warriors far more numerous than his own. If you'd like to see more battles broken down in this kind of detail, Cannae, Thermopylae, Normandy, and beyond, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next strategic breakdown right here at Apex War Lab.